In German history, there were some very crazy plans to conquer other countries. Most of these date back to Hitler's time, for example the plan to invade the British Isles, which we have already looked at in a separate video. Today's plan is even crazier than all the previous ones. It is about the conquest of the United States of America. But the interesting thing is that it does not come from the Nazi era. It was developed during the German Empire between 1897 and 1903. The goal was not only to weaken the growing influence of the United States, but above all to strengthen the German position in the Pacific, the Caribbean and South America. The plan was to establish a vast German colonial empire in the long term. But what did the plan look like in detail? What were the chances of success? And why was it never implemented? We take a look at all of these questions in today's video. Enjoy! The German Empire came into being quite late compared to the other European powers. In 1871, the struggle for the world's colonies was already in full swing. While Bismarck initially pursued a balanced course with the other powers, Kaiser Wilhelm II increasingly found Germans lagging behind a thorn in his side. He also dreamed of a vast colonial empire and the so-called place in the sun. And so at the end of the 19th century, German foreign policy increasingly shifted from a balanced stance to an aggressive one. This led again and again to disputes with the other colonial powers, and the emperor led develop various plans against the other nations. The Kaiser saw the United States in particular as a major competitor to the world power. The United States continued to expand in America and increasingly became the main power on the entire American double continent. And so, starting in 1897, the emperor had a total of 3 conquest plans developed against the United States. One of the most important contributors to these plans was Alfred von Tirpitz, who also developed the so-called Tirpitz Plan. According to this plan, Germany was to achieve the world power stalemate with the help of building a huge fleet. And this was indeed implemented, which is why Germany had the second largest navy in the world until the beginning of World War I. And Tirpitz was also involved in the invasion plans of the USA. This plan envisaged that a huge German fleet should decisively defeat the American Atlantic Fleet in a surprise attack in order to reach important distribution points on the US coast. The largest ports were to be bombed in order to eventually force the US into a negotiated peace. The goal of the peace treaty was to wrest bases in the Caribbean and also a base in the Pacific from the Americans. However, while this plan was still being drafted, the situation changed completely once again. The US defeated the Spanish in the Spanish-American War. As a result of the victory, the US gained control of Puerto Rico, the Philippines and Guam, and the Caribbean fell into its sphere of influence. Thus, the American position improved significantly and the German emperor realized that the plans had to be revised. So the new plan provided for the violent conquest of a base on Cuba, from where the rest of the operation was to be carried out. So from Cuba, the American Atlantic Fleet was to be destroyed this time as well. But then a landing was to be made at Cape Cod in Massachusetts. There, a formidable force was to land and lay siege to the cities of Boston and New York. However, many generals strongly doubted this plan, since there were not even enough ships for such a landing, and it also had many gaps in its execution in other places. So finally, there was another revision, and in 1903, the third plan was completed. According to this plan, the German fleet should gather off the archipelago of the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in order to carry out an attack on Puerto Rico from there. Then the Panama Canal was to be captured and a direct attack was to be made on the most important city in the United States, New York. The city was to be bled dry until the Americans decided to make a negotiated peace. Overall, however, this plan was also quite futile. Above all, the geopolitical situation had changed greatly in those few years. After the victory over the Spanish, a real war spirit had broken out in the US and the American army was getting stronger. As a result, the US increasingly emerged from its previous isolation and emerged as an important player in world politics. This period also saw the Monroe Doctrine, which stated that the Americans would no longer tolerate any interference by European powers on the American continent. And the situation on the European continent was also becoming increasingly difficult for Germany. The British and French formed an alliance in 1904, and Russia increasingly sided with them as well. So Germany was now threatened from two sides and a huge war was brewing. Thus, starting in 1906, US plans were completely discarded, and the focus was on improving Germany's position in Europe and the approaching First World War. So that was it with the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If yes, I also recommend you my last video. Just click here and see you there.